There is a vicious, scandalous, and quite frankly, defamatory view out there that I am anti-car. Outrageous allegation. I have had a driver's license for almost 30 years, and I've been a car owner almost as long. What the f? I love cars. And in this video, I'm going to tell you why driving is so great and why it's the #1 way Brisbane people choose to travel. Nothing beats the freedom of driving. Now I can get in my car, drive anywhere I want to for free, at my own pace, get there when I want. It's brilliant.
The west side BMW with your test drive today. Let's check your running. Work right now.
They go at Brisbane, Jamboree.
I love driving.
What?
Being stuck in traffic is just one of the prices you pay for driving. Just as for cycling, there's physical effort and slower travelling speed, and just as there's fares and dealing with timetables, there's a cost of public transport. Now, people understandably hate being stuck in traffic. It's frustrating, and when there's no alternative available, it feels even more frustrating. While cycling might be a little bit slower at times and it requires a bit more physical effort, you get exercise, you get fresh air, you get to relax. You're not stuck with the stress of driving in traffic. And similarly on a bus or a train, you get to sit back and relax and let someone else deal with it. But if those options aren't there, then the stress and frustration of driving can be overwhelming. Studies have shown that people who have to spend more time driving to work suffer more problems with depression, loss of sleep, and generally feeling unwell. That doesn't sound like freedom to me.
Why traffic? Traffic is my enemy. Clever now. Used to just be partially my enemy, now it's my mortal enemy.
Traffic is your mortal enemy. Yes. I mean, sure, traffic sucked, but at least I'm not paying for a bus ticket. This is free travel. What the f? What the f? What the f? Owning and operating a car is anything but free. The RACQ calculates that the average annual cost of a car in 2022 for a light car is around $10,000, anything up to a whopping $20,000 for a large off-road vehicle. The proliferation and popularity of large SUVs is a real problem. Apart from being a massive drain on the household budget, they're also demonstrably more dangerous, they create more emissions, they're more polluting, they require more space, and really they're just not the right tool for the job getting around a city. They're louder too. There's a very good reason why people call them wank panzers. This is a bit quieter. This week, Brisbane Times published a report that showed that in some suburbs of Brisbane, 60% or more of families have 3 or more cars. Just imagine that household budget drain. Unfortunately, given when my son goes to school and my wife works, there's no alternative means of transport other than driving unless you're comfortable riding on a 70km/h main road. So some would argue that if it's that big a deal, then we should move schools to the local school, or we should move closer to the school. And yeah, school shopping is actually a pretty big issue in Brisbane, and you can see that with school holiday traffic and how much better it is than during school term, because so many families travel quite a long way to take their kids to school. However, school choice and the reasons behind it is a really complicated topic, and that's not something I'm going to touch on this video. And generally speaking, if you ask someone who's upset about traffic congestion why they don't just move house, job or city, they're probably going to tell you to get lost. It's a little bit like that old argument of judging individuals' actions on climate change when they're asking for systemic change, but I digress. There's my old car. It's definitely not in the new to 5-year range from the RACQ, but it still cost me a pretty penny. Probably about $5,000 a year in fuel, $2.5 grand in servicing and maintenance, $500 a year in new tyres, and registration's about $1,000. So all up, it's probably between $9,000 and $10,000 a year, and that's without any kind of repayments on it, since it's well and truly paid off. Now, I don't hate this thing. I mean, I've had a lot of good times with it. We've had some great family holidays, we've gone camping, we've done lots of great trips which we wouldn't have been able to do without a car. But it's the fact that we have to use it for everything that really gets my goat. Not everything, but too many things. Because it's very expensive to run when you're stuck in traffic like I was on that trip in this video. It's just a waste of money. You know, at the moment, while cars are essential, you know, I'm starting to think about, do we go and upgrade? Do we buy an EV? Then it's going to throw in a whole lot of extra costs that, you know, with repayments and things like that. So having to think about outlaying that much money out of the family budget when things are already tight, inflation's going up, wages aren't going up nearly as fast. Cars are a useful tool. You know, there's value in having them for a lot of people, but having to have multiple of them and every family having to outlay, you know, thousands of dollars a year to own and operate one, is that really fair? Is that the cost that we're putting on people to participate in society? Doesn't seem right to me.
At least when the traffic's clear, I'm moving. Not like that cyclist that's just puttering along there. Hate to be them.
A few minutes later.
I passed that cyclist before. How did they get here quicker than me?
During most peak periods in Brisbane, average travel time for motorists isn't that much different to cycling. It can vary wildly when you're driving, obviously, when there's crashes or breakdowns, but for cycling it's pretty much consistent. When you leave home, you know what time you're going to get to your destination. And it can actually be even more efficient for cycling because, depending on how it's designed, cycling can actually go a shorter distance. It can cut through, sometimes where the road has to go the long way around. The cyclist in my video there benefited from that, where Moggle Road had to curve all the way around and up the hill, and the cycle route can just go straight up the hill. Now, cycling infrastructure is also generally much cheaper to build than roads. Even the most expensive cycling infrastructure, like the Indooroopilly Riverwalk at $52 million for just under a kilometre, that's still a lot cheaper than what we're spending at Moggle Road for the roundabout replacement, which is $180 million just for one intersection. And the upgrades for the M1, the Coomera connector down the Gold Coast is blown out to nearly $2 billion for, I don't know how many kilometres of road that is, but the fact is that cycling infrastructure is cheaper and it has a much better return on investment. TMR estimates that that's about $5 for every dollar spent. But I know what you're going to say. You travel too far to cycle, you've got to carry big loads. And look, that's a common argument. And it's true, Brisbane's a big city, and some of us do have to travel quite a long way for work or for various appointments and things. And cycling isn't for every trip. And I don't think any advocate for cycling or for urbanism or for better cities would tell you that every trip needs to be walked or cycled or even taking public transport. What we always say is that the majority of trips should be available to be done by those modes of transport and to be able to choose the right tool for the job, instead of every trip having to be done by car, which then doesn't work for anybody. It's like the old saying, if the only tool you've got to hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. However, despite Brisbane being a large city, more than 80% of trips taken are under 10 kilometres, and more than 57% are under 5 kilometres, which is a really easy distance to cycle, maybe 15, 20 minutes. But in Brisbane, 72% of those trips that are less than 5 kilometres are taken by car. You know, and when I looked at my local area, for trips under 500 metres, there's still two-thirds of those people take by car instead of walking. But despite the excuses people offer up about the weather, the distance, the amount of grand pianos they've got to carry on a daily basis, the biggest barrier to people taking up cycling is better cycling infrastructure. People value safety, funnily enough, and convenience. If cycling isn't visible, it isn't obviously safe, then people won't choose it, and that's just the reality. And so the main barrier in Brisbane is the lack of connectivity with our bike paths. We've got some fantastic cycleways, like the Bicentennial Bikeway behind me, and it gets over 3,000 users a day. The other day when I went through, it said there were 7,000 in the day. I don't know if there was a glitch, but let's go with that. But the problem is that if you've got to ride on busy main roads, sometimes with 70 km/h speed limits, with no separated infrastructure, people aren't going to do it, are they? You've got to be enthused and confident to do that. And if you're just thinking about riding a bike and you see that your route from A to B, there's a main road you've got to ride on, you're not going to do it. So the big bang for buck that we're going to get is by filling in those gaps in our cycling network so that we can actually call it a network, because it's not at the moment. And yet, despite the fact that more than half of all trips in Brisbane are less than 5 kilometres, despite the fact that we know that cycling infrastructure is cheap to build, despite the fact we know that cycling infrastructure has a high return on investment, the overwhelming priority of the budgets for our transport systems in Brisbane are on roads for private cars. It just doesn't make sense. But the fact remains that there's not a single place in Brisbane that you can't safely and conveniently drive to. You cannot say the same thing about walking, cycling or public transport, particularly in the suburbs. The other factor with widening roads is that by doing so, we're taking away land that could be used for housing, and in some cases is, as is the case with the Centenary motorway. And what that does, it pushes housing further out. It makes housing closer to where things are more walkable and rideable and with better public transport more expensive. And so that pushes more people out into the suburbs, requires more people to drive. It's a recurring cycle. At the end of the day, most people don't choose how they travel based on some moral or even direct cost issues. They choose the method that's the most convenient and intuitive. If that's driving, that's what people will do. Now, I like to ride my bike, but if there's trips I've got to travel across town, if I've got to take my son to football at Caboolture or something, I'm not going to ride, I'm going to drive, because there's no quick or effective public transport there, and it is simply too far to cycle. So people will choose the method of transport that is most convenient and most accessible. So if the most easy and convenient way to get around is not driving, whether it be walking or cycling or catching public transport, then families aren't forced to own a car or multiple cars just to get around. Unfortunately, what we continue to do in Brisbane is to try and make driving marginally more effective, getting you home quicker and safer, so long as you're in a car. And so that just entrenches the view that you're forced to drive. And when that happens, people are even resentful of suggestions for investing money in, say, cycling lanes or bus lanes. And just on that car journey that's in this video, there was over $300 million of congestion busting projects. And that's really just designed to make it marginally better to drive. Sure, they're upgrading the cycleway in the Centenary Bridge project, but people are still being told, oh, you're getting a better driving experience, so keep driving. It's not going to achieve the way you're going to bust congestion, and that's to reduce the number of people driving. So the reality is that there's two ways that you can reduce congestion. One, keep increasing capacity. There's only so much you can do, and the more lanes you add, the more cost there is, the more knock-on projects there are that have to do it.
Have you heard of the Jevons paradox?
I'm hoping they're a death metal band.
It basically states that the better you make something like a road, the more people will use it.
Isn't that a good thing?
No, it means you spend a lot of money now for a very short-term benefit.
The other way, and the way that will actually work, is to reduce the number of people driving. Drop that mode share of trips from over 70 or 80% by car down towards 60 or even 50%. If we can get down to that level, then we will have busted congestion. But are we even trying to do that?
The upgrade will cover more than 2 kilometres of this commuter corridor. Council says it will reduce congestion by widening Beans Road to 4 lane.
Now, if you agree with me, we should all be telling our representatives that we don't just want to get home a little bit quicker in our cars. We want to be able to get places easily, safely, conveniently, without using our car at all. And you know what? If we do that, we reduce the number of people driving, we do actually bust congestion, which is what they keep telling us is what they want to do. And that's the other thing. In 2032, we're hosting the Olympics. You think people who are going to be coming in droves from countries where driving isn't the default way to travel are going to be impressed by how we get around our city? We've got a lot of work to do in the next 9 years. So please, don't be fooled when a politician says they're going to bust congestion with some road and beginning project. All they're doing is forcing you to keep driving, enduring the frustration, the stress and depression of driving in traffic, and the drain on your family's finances that is. Now, the point of this video isn't to shame you if most of your trips are by car. And in fact, even in my family still, probably a good bulk of trips overall are probably taken by car. I still do a larger weekly shop at the local supermarket by car. Again, that's out of convenience. I do smaller shops during the week, but I prefer just to get the bulk items at once, So it's not about shaming individual behaviour, individual choices. You know, I talk to people that they would love to not drive. They really hate the morning stress and the evening stress of driving to work or the train station or picking up their kids, and they love to have the option of riding, and they just don't feel it's safe. Or they love to catch connecting buses, but they're too infrequent. You know, there's people that want these options. And yeah, there's people who are perfectly happy just driving and that they would never consider anything else. They don't like the traffic, and that's fine. They'll still benefit when we fix public and active transport too. And maybe when they see that it's better, they'll think differently. But the message really to governments and local councils is, just because everyone at the moment tells you they want to drive all the time and they want you to get rid of the traffic so they can drive better, they don't know anything different. You've made it so that that's their only option. And you can also make it so they do have options. So no, I am not anti-car. Cars are a fantastic tool that have opened access to places, spaces and destinations. I'm anti-car dependence. I am against people being forced to own and drive a car simply because the government won't adequately invest in public and active transport alternatives so that they have that choice. I hate it when I feel like I have to drive and it's a really horrible experience because there's no better option. That's all. And I know I'm not the only one. Are you with me? Sweet. Make sure you hit that like button, whack on the subscribe, hit the notification bell, and make sure you get in the comments. What kind of trips are you forced to drive? What would it take to make you leave the car at home, hop on a bike, an e-scooter, walk, or public transport? Have the discussion here, but then more importantly, go have that same discussion with your local councillor and your local state MP and your federal MP as well. Because if they're just going to act on what they hear, then they've got to hear from you. Ride safely, drive rarely, even though it's hard, and I'll catch you next time. What a beautiful day. Now I gotta get home and edit. Having to drive is my mortal enemy. Being forced to drive. Ugh.
Good night.
Bye.
Wait.
Good night. Have a good sleep. See you in the morning.
Bye.
Bye.
We gotta take a picture.
It's because we've been in the car so long.
Yeah.